lower level, you see already higher levels of percentage of extremely annoyed by the noise of rail traffic. As you see, there's much less studies on rail traffic, by the way. For road traffic noise, you don't see the same pattern, which is quite surprising, because we all know there's a tremendous increase in noise. At the same time, there has been a lot of mitigating measures. So maybe we are more successful in mitigating road traffic noise, but in general, the curve hasn't changed very much. In hospital noise, because there's so few studies there, they used a broader time span, and studies that either measured or predicted noise levels were included, but not studies that use distance as a proxy for the exposure levels. And as you see, for aircraft, we see the same pattern as for annoyance. The dose response curve is at a much higher level than the original red generalized Miedema curve. For road traffic, this is not so extreme, actually somewhat lower. And we talk here about night exposure. I have to be clear about that, the effect of night exposure on sleep disturbance, which again is measured usually in questionnaires, asking people in general how much is your sleep disturbed by noise from air, rail, or roads. So it's a very subjective measure. Then, being a sleep expert, Matthias also included studies which looked at number of awakenings, motility during sleep, all the other measures based on large field experiments. And they did review all of these studies, but they found a significant effect of the probability of additional sleep stage changes. Now, that's quite a complicated effect measure to have, but as you can imagine, if your sleep gets disturbed at very crucial moments, the system, or our system, is tended to catch up. So if we miss the deep sleep, it's caught up by stretching the amount of time spent in deep sleep, and it makes the sleep circle or cycle very inefficient. And they could produce those response curves for this measure for all noise sources. Now, a big shift. We move from adults to children. We move from physical effects to cognitive effects, and these have been studied, I could say, almost exclusively in school children between 9 and 12 years old. And these are the main studies. The first studies were performed around Munich airport in late 90s. The Tyrol study by Peter Lerger. In the Netherlands, Spain, and the UK around Heathrow, we performed a RANCH, so-called RANCH study, and more recently, the NORA study around Frankfurt Airport looked at the cognitive effects on school children. There's actually, I will quickly go through this, but there's two lines of research, sort of quasi-experimental studies on the effects of chronic noise exposure on cognitive development. And what is cognitive development? That's short and long-term memory. It's being able to repeat what the teachers have said, but then with a lag time of a few hours. It's about reading, and not technical reading, but comprehensive reading. So do the children actually understand what they read? And can they memorize it? And there's a whole series of experimental studies where acute effects on performance are measured. But these play not as much a role in the dose-response relations derived from these studies. Very few studies in children, again. So what are the conclusions of this exercise? There's limited evidence of the health effect of environmental noise intervention in terms of the number of studies. So we only have a handful of studies to base this on. We need more studies, and these should report observed changes in health outcomes, observed changes in exposures, and quantify the details on this change effect that we saw, and not just changes in emission or changes in noise levels, because it doesn't really tell you what the response of people actually will be. From the evidence available, we can say that there's no matter what was done, there was always a positive effect. So we couldn't say one intervention is better than the other. The minimum change can be predicted from the exposure response functions, and the observed changes in outcome systematically exceed those from the exposure response functions. And we talk about, often it's referred to as an over response, but we call it an excess response. It's much less judgmental. And finally, we do not see clear thresholds, so it's not like after 58 we all of a sudden see an enormous extra effect. It's over the whole range of noise. We do know very little about longitudinal effects, but as I said, the few studies that looked at in a longer period see that the effects are sustained. And new, I think, is the fact that we included studies which didn't do the direct interventions, but the indirect interventions, a quiet site, a park in a neighborhood, and other more visual interventions. And they are definitely worthwhile looking into a bit more in the future. So what does this mean for management and policy? The current noise management strategies currently have the potential for beneficial effects, but we have to be aware that the evidence is not extensive and not very well distributed over the sources, the intervention types, and the health outcomes, as we saw in these overviews. The magnitude of the intervention is still highly unknown, and the evidence on sleep disturbance is restricted to aircraft noise only. So there, most of the conclusions are only for aircraft noise. The 7th Environmental Action Plan for EU 2020 is behind this exercise of the EU Noise Committee, which says reduce noise levels toward the guideline values of WHO. And an important tool for this, as I mentioned before, is the European Noise Directive, which in Annex 2, the noise mapping, which I'm aware many of you are more familiar with than the health effects, and Annex 3, which at this point is an empty box, so everything that was ever in it has been removed, and now we start anew. The revision of Annex 2 is primarily focused on implementing the EU noise modeling method Knossos, and the revision Annex 3 is primarily based on the new WHO guidelines. It's under revision. It tries to follow the latest insight, and the main aim of the project is to develop a guidance tool to assess and evaluate the health effects at population level due to environmental noise. Now, we only have 6 months to do this, so it's a very, very compact way of trying to develop a guidance tool. My institute is involved, TUS, Charlotte Clark from Arab Griffith University, which is Lex Brown, and Matthias Passner. So we involved people who were directly involved in the reviews, which makes life easier. They don't have to study it all over again. They just did the reviews. And the proposed work plan is to select a set of environmental health indicators. And I've learned this is a very confusing term, but the health indicator is, for instance, compliance to the guideline values, limit values, or the so-called disability adjusted life year indicator, and then a whole set of indicators in between. The starting point is that we made a list of all these different indicators and looked at the available dose-response relations. And currently we are country-specific mortality and morbidity data, so data about deaths and number of people dying of a certain disease or getting ill from it. And the fourth is the number of people affected by noise, and that's what was originally in the Annex 3. It's calculating the number of people highly annoyed, highly sleep disturbed with the existing noise data, and finally the disability adjusted life years. Now the committee has told us they prefer the last one, but now that we know a bit more, many people find it a very complicated measure. So how could you oblige municipalities to actually apply something that's as complicated and time-consuming as the DALI? So that will be the big debate, basically, about this tool. Also, it's important that the indicator enables the municipalities to compare, do a before-after sort of effectivity. Are there noise plans, action plans, effective or not? Or can they, this exercise help them to prioritize their measures? So this is what we are currently working on. I will not bore you with this, but this is what we put in front of several partners and stakeholders, the list of the indicators and a set of criteria. And just to make it, to simplify it, one part of the criteria has to do with scientifically sound or scientifically based, and the other part is about simply to accept it by the users, simply to apply, doesn't need too much expertise to be applied, and you can explain it to the general public. And we see already that there's the real tension between the two. Yes, you can develop something simple and easy to understand, but it will not be accepted scientifically and the other way around. So the clue will be to find a good mix of the two worlds. We already were able, and I don't think you can read this, but able to choose the outcomes for which solid dose-response relations are available, as I showed in my previous talk. And in summary, it's the ischemic heart disease and stroke, percentage highly annoyed, percentage highly sleep disturbed, and the number of children with impaired reading at certain levels from all sources. This is the timeline, and it's not a promise, but somewhere in July there will be a guidance tool for Annex 3, or at least an advice what should be in it. And I'm very keen on getting feedback on how this actually works in the end. So thank you for your attention.